Cattle Baron Bartholomew McGraw watches from shadows as waitress Clementine Rose secretly feeds his disabled son extra food. Her kindness awakens something in his cold heart. He offers her a life-changing deal: move into his mansion and care for his mute boy. But Clementine's outlaw past threatens everything, with wanted posters in 3 territories and a vengeful nemesis hunting her down. Before we start this western tale of second chances, comment where you are tuning in from. The Golden Steer Saloon stood defiant against the howling Wyoming dust storm of 1883. Amber light spilled from its windows, a beacon in the growing darkness as wind-driven sand scoured the wooden boardwalks of Timber Creek. Inside, Clementine Rose moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her keen eyes noting every entrance and exit, her back never fully turned to the door. She balanced a tray of whiskies with one hand while the other remained free, hovering near. The small knife concealed in her apron pocket. 6 months in this town had taught her caution, but 6 years on the run had taught her survival. A burst of cruel laughter drew her attention to the corner table where 3 cowboys had been drinking. Since noon, their target was a small boy in a wheelchair, perhaps 10 years old, staring silently at a harmonica in his lap. One cowboy mimicked the child's blank expression while his companions roared with amusement. Clementine adjusted her course, stepping between tables with newfound purpose. As she neared the cowboys, she stumbled slightly, sending 3 full glasses of whiskey cascading into their laps. "My sincere apologies, gentlemen," she said, not sounding sorry at all. While they cursed and jumped to their feet, she slipped an extra helping of potatoes onto the plate of the wide-eyed boy. "Some men just waste good air by breathing it," she whispered, winking at him. The ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first hint of emotion she had seen in the weeks he had been visiting the saloon with his father. From the shadows of the private dining room, Bartholomew "Beef" McGraw observed the interaction with interest. The cattle baron rarely ventured into town these days, preferring the isolation of his Crimson Ridge ranch. But business required his attention occasionally, and his son refused to be left behind. Now, watching the waitress defend Angus Jr., something stirred in him that he thought had died alongside his 3rd wife 2 years ago. "More brandy, Mr. McGraw?" The proprietor approached nervously. "Who is she?" Beef nodded toward Clementine. "Miss Rose, been here about half a year. Hard worker, keeps to herself. Popular with the customers, though." The man hesitated. "Some say she came from Colorado, but she never speaks of it." Beef watched as Clementine efficiently managed the rowdy crowd. There was something in her movements, a wariness that spoke of hard lessons learned. When she stepped outside briefly to empty a bucket, he moved to the window, curious. In the alley, 2 men were harassing a native woman trying to sell blankets. Clementine set down her bucket and stepped between them, her voice too low to hear, but her stance unmistakable. When one man reached for her arm, her movement was a blur. Suddenly, he was against the wall, gasping, while Clementine stood calm, her hand hidden in the folds of her skirt. The men retreated quickly. Clementine helped the woman gather her blankets, pressed something into her hand, and returned inside, resuming her duties as if nothing had happened. Too practiced, too precise. This was no ordinary waitress. The next morning, Beef returned to the Golden Steer. Clementine was sweeping the porch, her hair copper-bright in the morning sun. "Miss Rose, I would speak with you," he said without preamble. She paused, broom in hand. "Mr. McGraw, what can I do for Wyoming's cattle king?" "My son, Angus Jr. You were kind to him yesterday." Clementine shrugged. "Any decent person would be. Decency is rare in these parts." Beef removed his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and grief. "I've buried 3 wives, Miss Rose. The last one left me with a son who hasn't spoken since the accident that took his mother and his voice." I'm sorry for your losses, Mr. McGraw. I'm offering you a position at Crimson Ridge. Double your current wages to be Angus Jr.'s caretaker. Her knuckles whitened on the broom handle. I'm not a nurse. He doesn't need nursing. He needs someone who sees him as more than broken. Beef replaced his hat. Consider it. I'll return tomorrow for your answer. Clementine barely slept that night, weighing risk against necessity. Staying in one place was dangerous for a woman with wanted posters bearing her likeness in 3 territories. But winter was coming, funds were low, and there was something about the silent boy that tugged at her carefully guarded heart. When Beef returned, she had her answer ready. I accept, with conditions. I come and go as I please. I'm not a servant to be ordered about, and if your son shows any distress at my presence, I leave immediately. Beef nodded. Agreed. Pack your things. We leave at noon. Crimson Ridge sprawled across the foothills like a small kingdom. The main house, built of red stone and timber, overlooked vast grazing lands where prize cattle roamed under the watchful eyes of cowboys on horseback. As they approached, Clementine noted defensive positions, water sources, and escape routes from habit. Snake Eyes Jenkins, Beef's foreman, met them at the door, his gaze suspicious beneath the brim of his hat. This is Miss Rose, Beef announced. She'll be caring for Angus Jr. Boss, we don't know nothing about this woman, Jenkins warned, not bothering to lower his voice. I know she's the first person to make my boy smile in 2 years, Beef replied, ending the conversation with a look that brooked no argument. Clementine settled into a comfortable room, adjacent to Angus Jr.'s. The boy watched her silently as she unpacked her meager belongings, including a small pistol she tucked beneath her pillow when she thought no one was looking. That evening, after helping Angus prepare for bed, Clementine explored the vast house. In the library, she discovered maps of the surrounding territory with markings indicating properties adjacent to Crimson Ridge. Notations in Beef's handwriting suggested strategies for acquisition, some less than honorable. A soft, scraping sound alerted her. In the hallway, she found Angus attempting to drag himself toward his father's study, determination etched on his young face. Inside the study, voices murmured. Clementine helped Angus closer, allowing him to listen through the crack in the door. The Merler place is the key, Beef was saying. Once we control that water access, the smaller ranchers will have no choice but to sell. And if they refuse? Asked a well-dressed stranger. Winter has a way of changing minds, Beef replied coldly. Clementine felt Angus tense beneath her hands. When she looked down, his eyes held not fear, but resignation, as if his father's ruthlessness was a familiar burden. She carried him back to his room, their shared silence and understanding. Both recognized the cost of survival in this harsh land, but perhaps neither fully accepted it. Over the following weeks, Clementine began teaching Angus to communicate through his harmonica, assigning different notes to basic needs and emotions. 3 short notes meant water. A long, low tone signaled pain or sadness. A series of ascending notes expressed joy, rare but precious. Beef often watched from doorways, unseen, as Angus responded to Clementine's patient instruction. The hollow empire he had built, structured around revenge and ambition, suddenly seemed to echo with something forgotten: hope. One evening, as Clementine read to Angus by the fire, Beef entered openly, settling into a chair opposite them. Without prompting, he began to tell stories of the early days at Crimson Ridge, when he and his first wife had built their dream from nothing but courage and determination. Angus listened, wide-eyed, perhaps hearing these tales for the first time. When Beef described how his mother had named the ridge for the way sunset painted the stones crimson, the boy played a new note on his harmonica, sweet and questioning. Yes, Beef answered, as if understanding perfectly. She would have. Love that you play her favorite instrument. That night, watching from her window as Beef stood alone by the corral, Clementine saw not the feared cattle baron, but a man haunted by loss and the empire it had driven him to build. An empire that might, she feared, someday crush them all beneath its weight. Spring brought new life to Crimson Ridge. Green shoots pierced the thawing earth as cattle returned from winter pastures, their calves wobbling on uncertain legs. For Clementine, the season marked 4 months at the ranch, longer than she had stayed anywhere since fleeing her father's outlaw gang. Each morning, she helped Angus with exercises to strengthen his legs, though the boy showed little improvement. Afternoons were devoted to his education and harmonica lessons, where his progress was remarkable. He had developed a complex language of notes and rhythms that Clementine could now understand almost as clearly as spoken words. Beef often joined them, awkward at first, then with growing confidence. The hard lines of his face softened when Angus played, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been without tragedy's repeated blows. On a bright April morning, Clementine accompanied Angus to the stables, where Beef introduced a new gift, a pony cart specially built so the boy could drive himself around the ranch yard. "Independence is a man's birthright," Beef said, helping Angus into the seat, "even when life tries to steal it." The boy's fingers trembled on the reins, not from fear, but excitement. He played a rippling sequence of joyful notes that made both adults smile. Watching father and son together, Clementine felt a dangerous warmth spreading through her carefully guarded heart. This feeling of belonging was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with her past always one step behind her. That afternoon, while helping Mrs. Gunderson, the housekeeper, with dinner preparations, Clementine overheard Snake Eyes Jenkins in the next room. Something ain't right about her, boss. No history, no family talk. Way too handy with them kitchen knives, too. "You questioning my judgment, Jenkins?" Beef's voice carried a warning. "Just saying maybe we should look into where she came from, for the boy's safety." "Leave it be," Beef commanded, but Clementine knew the damage was done. Questions led to inquiries, and inquiries to discovery. That night she packed her few possessions, ready to flee if necessary. But as she checked her escape route through the kitchen garden, she saw Angus in his wheelchair by the corral, watching the stars. His harmonica lay silent in his lap, his expression one of such perfect contentment that Clementine couldn't bear the thought of disappearing from his life without a word, as so many others had done. She returned to her room, unpacked, and slept fitfully, dreams filled with pursuit and capture. The following week brought cattle drive preparations. 2,000. Head needed moving to summer pastures higher in the foothills. Clementine kept to her duties with Angus, but found herself studying the cowboys' preparations with professional interest. When Beef announced he would lead the drive himself, Angus played an anxious melody. "He's asking to come along," Clementine translated. Beef frowned. "It's no place for a boy who can't sit a horse." Angus's response was a series of determined notes. "He says he'll ride in the chuck wagon, that he needs to learn the business someday." Clementine hesitated. "He also says he'll behave for me if I come too." To her surprise, Beef agreed. And 3 days later, they joined the drive. For Angus, it was an adventure. For Clementine, it was a risk, exposing herself to 20 cowboys who might recognize her from wanted posters. On the second day, disaster struck. A spring storm rolled in suddenly, spooking the lead cattle. As lightning flashed and rain poured down, the herd began to stampede toward a ravine. Without thinking, Clementine grabbed a horse from the remuda, swung aboard bareback, and raced past the startled cowboys. Her commands cut through the storm's fury. "Cut them off at the ridge. Murray takes 6 men left. Jenkins, right flank now." She rode like someone born to the saddle, her accuracy with the lasso startling even the veteran hands. When a steer charged her, she drew the small pistol from her boot and fired a perfect warning shot that turned the beast aside. By the time the herd was contained, with minimal losses, the storm had passed. Clementine found herself facing a semicircle of stunned cowboys and Beef McGraw, whose expression mingled admiration with suspicion. That evening, he cornered her by the chuck wagon while Angus slept inside. "Who taught you to ride like that?" Beef demanded, his voice low. Clementine straightened, knowing the moment she had dreaded had arrived. "My father." "And does your father have a name folks around here might know?" The silence stretched between them until she finally whispered, "Rusty Malone." Beef's face transformed, hardening like the Wyoming winter had returned in an instant. "Rabbi Malone's daughter in my house, teaching my son?" His laugh was sharp, bitter. "You're Ruby Malone." "I was," she acknowledged. "I ran from that life, from him. Yet you're still wanted." "For crimes I was forced into," she said, chin lifting. "Judge me by what I've done here, not by my father's brand." Something shifted in Beef's expression, recognition perhaps of another soul scarred by circumstances beyond control. "Why did you come to Crimson Ridge? Was it to spy for your father?" "I didn't know who owned the Golden Steer when I took the job. When you offered me this position, I knew the risk, but I also saw a chance to help Angus." She met his gaze squarely. "I've never betrayed your trust with him." Beef stared at her, conflict evident in his eyes. Finally, he nodded once. "We'll finish this drive. After that, we'll decide what comes next." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a reprieve. Clementine spent the remaining days of the cattle drive, proving her value, working twice as hard as any hand. Angus watched from the chuck wagon, his harmonica playing progressively happier tunes as he observed the growing respect the cowboys showed his caretaker. Upon their return to Crimson Ridge, life assumed a cautious new rhythm. Beef neither dismissed Clementine nor fully trusted her, maintaining a wary distance even as he included her in more ranch activities. Meanwhile, Angus flourished. By early summer, he had developed enough upper body strength to pull himself into his pony cart without assistance. His harmonica playing became more complex, and occasionally Clementine caught him attempting to form words, though no sound emerged from his throat. During this tenuous peace, Clementine discovered Beef's study unlocked one evening. Curiosity overcame caution, and she slipped inside, searching for information about her father's whereabouts. Instead, she found a journal containing Beef's private thoughts. The earliest entries revealed a different man, idealistic, gentle, deeply in love with his first wife, Sarah. Their dreams for Crimson Ridge had included schools, fair treatment of neighboring ranchers, and respect for the native peoples whose lands they shared. But subsequent pages chronicled Sarah's death in childbirth, followed by Beef's growing bitterness and 2 more tragic marriages. The most recent entries mentioned Clementine herself, noting her skill with Angus, and surprisingly, admiration for her resilience. She returned the journal, unsettled by this glimpse into Beef's heart. The following week, trouble arrived in the form of Cornelius Slate, a railroad magnate whose plans for a new line required access through Crimson Ridge. Beef invited him to dinner, where the man's smooth manners concealed predatory intentions. "Progress waits for no man, McGraw," Slate remarked, swirling brandy in his glass. "Even cattle kings bow before steel rails." "Some men mistake progress for theft," Beef replied. "My land remains my own." Slate's eyes flickered to Clementine, then Angus. Family changes a man's priorities, makes him consider the future differently. The veiled threat hung in the air like gun smoke. After Slate departed, Clementine helped Angus to bed, then found Beef on the porch, staring at distant lightning illuminating the mountains. "He'll cause trouble," she said simply. "Men like Slate always do." Beef glanced at her. "Your father and I have that in common, at least. Neither of us bows easily." It was the first time he had mentioned ribeye without contempt, a small but significant shift. As July's heat intensified, so did the connection between beef and Clementine. They shared stories beneath Wyoming stars, his of building an empire from nothing after his first wife's death, hers of learning to survive while maintaining some shred of decency in her father's violent world. What neither revealed, the depths of their shared past. Beef didn't mention that his first wife was Ribeye's beloved sister. Clementine kept secret the letters she had intercepted, warning of her father's imminent arrival. Their fragile peace shattered during the town's independence day celebration. Clementine had hesitated to attend, but Angus's pleading harmonica solos wore down her resistance. They joined the townsfolk for races, pie competitions, and finally, fireworks. As the first rockets illuminated the night sky, a familiar figure strode into the square, tall with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes the same shade as Clementine's. Rusty Ribeye Malone commanded attention without effort. His gaze found his daughter instantly across the crowd. "There's my Ruby," he called, voice carrying over the celebration noise. "Time to come home, girl." Before Clementine could respond, the sheriff pushed through the crowd, warrant in hand. "Ruby Malone, you're under arrest for the Sweetwater train robbery." Chaos erupted. Ribeye's men, positioned throughout the crowd, created diversions with small explosions that sent horses panicking and townsfolk running. The old outlaw grabbed Clementine's arm. "Come with me now, or hang tomorrow." She pulled free, her decision made in that instant. "I'm done running." Turning, she raced for the McGraw wagon, where Beef was already loading Angus. Their eyes met in perfect understanding as she swung aboard, and they galloped toward Crimson Ridge, knowing the storm that had threatened for months had finally broken. Upon them all, smoke billowed over the eastern ridge as Clementine guided her horse along the high trail back to Crimson Ridge. She had left before dawn to scout for signs of pursuers, either the law or her father's men. Instead, she discovered something worse. Below in the valley, men on horseback circled the Mueller homestead, torches in hand. The small farm stood between Crimson Ridge and the planned railway, the last holdout among neighbors who had already sold to Beef or fled after mysterious misfortunes. Clementine recognized Slate's distinctive white horse among the riders. As she watched, they set fire to the barn. Mrs. Muller, a widow of 60, emerged from the house with a shotgun that was quickly taken from her hands. When Clementine returned to the ranch, she found Beef in the yard, issuing instructions to armed cowboys. Their eyes met across the distance. "They're burning out the Mullers," she reported, dismounting, "using your name to do it." Beef's jaw tightened. "I wanted that land, but not like this. Slate's men are headed this way next, and my father's not far behind." Snake Eyes Jenkins spat on the ground. "Use the girl as bait, draw Ribeye in, then turn him over to the law. Might buy us some goodwill with the sheriff." To everyone's surprise, Beef stepped between them. "Miss Rose is under my protection. Any man who says different answers to me." The declaration hung in the air, reshaping alliances and possibilities in an instant. Clementine felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or its dangerous cousin belonging. That evening, as they prepared for potential siege, Angus wheeled himself to the parlor where Beef studied maps of their property. Without prompting, the boy lifted his harmonica and played a haunting melody that stopped his father cold. "Where did you learn that tune?" Beef demanded, his voice hollow. Clementine, arranging ammunition nearby, explained it was something the boy had created himself. "No," Beef said. "That was Sarah's song, my first wife's lullaby." The revelation hung in the room like ghost breath in winter air. Before they could discuss it further, hoofbeats approached. Beef reached for his rifle, but the riders weren't attackers. The displaced Mellors sought refuge, along with 3 other families forced from their land. Among them was Widow Mellor herself, her face soot-streaked but dignified. She studied Clementine with sharp eyes. "You're Hannah's girl, all right, got her eyes." "You knew my mother?" Clementine asked, stunned. The old woman nodded. "Before she married Ribeye, she and Sarah Anderson were inseparable, like sisters, those two." The pieces aligned like stars forming a constellation. Sarah Anderson became Beef's first wife. The cattle baron and the outlaw were once brothers-in-law, their legendary feud born from shared grief rather than greed. Beef's expression confirmed the truth. "Sarah died in childbirth with our first child. I blamed Ribeye for keeping Hannah. From her side, Hannah was the only midwife Sarah trusted. And my mother died of fever the following winter," Clementine added softly. "Father always said her heart broke when she learned of Sarah's passing. The revelations came too late. At dawn, shots rang out as Slate's men attacked, overwhelming the ranch's defenses from multiple directions. Clementine fought alongside the cowboys, her accuracy with a rifle earning grudging respect from even Snake Eyes. The battle raged for an hour before the attackers withdrew, leaving 2 of Beef's men wounded but alive. Victory seemed possible until Jenkins burst into the house, his face ashen. "They've taken the boy," he reported. "Angus is gone." Clementine found signs of entry through Angus's bedroom window. On his pillow lay a folded note. Beef was to sign over all water rights by sundown, or his son would be returned in a pine box. "I'll give him what he wants," Beef said, his voice dead. "And then what?" Clementine challenged. "You think Slate will stop? He'll take everything, piece by piece. What would you have me do, risk my son?" Clementine stood straighter. "We need my father. He's the best tracker in the territory, and his men are loyal. Ribeye Malone would sooner shoot me than help me. Not if he knew the truth. Not if he knew you were Sarah's husband." She took a breath. "Let me find him. Let me try." For a long moment Beef stared at her, measuring her worth against his pride. Finally he nodded. "We ride in 10 minutes." They departed with minimal supplies, leaving Jenkins to coordinate the ranch's defense. Following rumors and instinct, Clementine led them to a hidden valley, where outlaws often camped between jobs. As dusk settled over the land, they spotted campfire smoke rising from a sheltered glen. "Let me approach first," Clementine insisted. "He won't shoot his own daughter." "Don't be too sure," Beef muttered, but held his position as she rode forward. Ribeye Malone sat by the fire, cleaning a revolver with methodical care. He looked up as she approached, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Thought you might show up," he said calmly, though not with McGraw in tow. "We need your help," Clementine replied, dismounting. "Slate's men have taken Angus." Something flickered in the old outlaw's eyes. "The mute boy? What's that to me?" "He's your nephew's son." Ribeye stilled. "What game are you playing, Ruby?" "No game. Beef McGraw was married to Sarah Anderson. Your sister." She let that sink in. "The feud between you was built on misunderstanding and grief, fueled by Slate for his own purposes." Ribeye looked past her to where Beef waited on horseback. "That true, McGraw?" Beef rode forward slowly, stopping just beyond easy shooting distance. "Sarah died giving birth to our firstborn son. The child died with her. I blamed your family for not being there when she needed you. And I blamed you for taking her to that godforsaken ranch away from proper help." Ribeye's voice roughened. "Hannah never forgave herself." "None of that matters now," Clementine interrupted. "What matters is that Slate has Angus, and we need to find him before sundown." The old enemies regarded each other across years of hatred, each seeing for the first time the shared loss that connected them. Finally, Ribeye nodded. "John, Pete, saddle up," he called to his men. "We're going hunting." With Ribeye's tracking skills and knowledge of the territory, they soon discovered Slate's hideout, an abandoned mining office near the proposed railway line. 4 guards patrolled outside, while light flickered from within the stone building. "Too many for a direct approach," Ribeye observed. "I count at least 10 men. We need a distraction," Beef agreed. Clementine studied the layout. The horses are penned on the south side. A stampede would draw most of them away. Ribeye nodded approvingly. "You always did have your mother's quick mind." As night deepened, they set their plan in motion. Ribeye's men circled behind the camp to free the horses, while Beef, Clementine, and Ribeye himself positioned themselves to enter the building during the chaos. When gunshots and shouts erupted from the corral, guards ran to investigate. Beef led the way inside, Clementine covering him with her rifle while Ribeye watched their backs. They found Angus tied to a chair in the main office, Slate standing over him with a derringer. The railwayman's eyes widened at the unlikely alliance before him. "One more step, and the boy dies," Slate warned. "Then we all die here," Beef replied, calmly, "because I will not leave this room without my son." Angus, though frightened, met his father's gaze steadily. His fingers twitched against the rope binding his wrists, tapping out a rhythm only Clementine recognized from their secret code. "He's going to try something," she whispered to Beef. "Be ready." When Slate reached for the water rights document, on his desk, Angus suddenly threw himself sideways, chair and all, knocking into the man's legs. The derringer fired into the ceiling as Clementine lunged forward, disarming Slate with a swift strike to his wrist. Ribeye and Beef subdued the remaining guards, while Clementine untied Angus, checking him for injuries. The boy's hands trembled, but his eyes were clear, full of relief and something else, determination. Outside, the commotion had drawn attention. From a nearby camp of displaced ranchers, Widow Miller arrived, with several armed neighbors, just as Slate was being tied to his own chair. "This man has manipulated us all," Clementine announced, producing letters she had found in Slate's saddlebags. "He created conflict between McGraw and Malone, then used that feud to pressure smaller ranchers, all while secretly acquiring land for the railway under different names." The sheriff, summoned by the gunfire, examined the evidence with growing anger. When Slate threatened to have his job, the lawman laughed. "My job is to uphold the law, not bend it for railway money. You'll stand trial for kidnapping, fraud, and attempted murder." As Slate was led away, Beef approached Ribeye cautiously. "We have unfinished business, you and I. 20 years of it," the outlaw agreed. "Perhaps it's time to finish it differently than we started." Beef extended his hand. "For Sarah's sake and Hannah's." The moment stretched taut as wire between them. Then Ribeye clasped Beef's hand, the gesture awkward but sincere. "The boy has her eyes," Ribeye said, nodding toward Angus. "Sarah's eyes." "Yes," Beef agreed, "he does." As they prepared to return to Crimson Ridge, Slate made a final desperate move. Breaking free from the distracted deputy, he grabbed a hidden weapon and lunged for Angus, hatred contorting his features. Without hesitation, Beef threw himself between them, taking the bullet meant for his son. As Beef fell, blood blossoming across his shirt, something miraculous happened. Angus Jr., silent for years, cried out, "Pa!" The sound, ragged and unpracticed, froze everyone in place. As the sheriff subdued Slate once more, Clementine and Ribeye both knelt beside Beef, whose face registered shock despite his pain. "You spoke," he whispered to his son. "You spoke." Angus nodded, tears streaming down his face as he took his father's hand. "Pa," he repeated, the word emerging stronger this time. "Stay." The town doctor worked through the night to save Beef McGraw. Outside his room at the Golden Steer Inn, former enemies sat together in uneasy alliance. Ribeye Malone's riders shared coffee with McGraw cowboys, exchanging stories of cattle drives and narrow escapes. Between these worlds sat Clementine, holding Angus as he dozed against her shoulder. The boy had not spoken again since his desperate cry, but his harmonica lay untouched in his pocket. Instead, his fingers formed simple gestures Clementine had taught him, asking repeatedly about his father. "The doctor is doing everything he can," she assured him, smoothing his hair. "Your father is strong." Snake Eyes Jenkins paced the hallway, his usual swagger diminished by concern. "Never seen the boss fall before," he muttered. "Not once in 15 years. "First time for everything," Ribeye replied, his gruff tone softened by shared worry. "Even mountains crumble." Eventually, dawn painted the eastern sky when the doctor emerged, wiping blood-stained hands on a towel. "He'll live," he announced to the waiting group. "Bullet missed his heart by an inch, lost blood, but he's stable." Angus struggled from Clementine's embrace, gesturing urgently toward the door. "Yes," she said, understanding. "You can see him now." The boy wheeled himself into the room, where Beef lay pale against white sheets. For a moment he hesitated, then laboriously formed a word with his lips. "Pa." Beef's eyes fluttered open. "Angus?" His voice was weak, but clear. "You spoke again." The boy nodded, tears tracking down his cheeks as he reached for his father's hand. "We need to talk about water rights," Beef said, attempting to sit up before wincing in pain. Clementine stepped forward. "That can wait until you're stronger." "No." Beef's gaze sharpened with purpose. "Bring me paper and ink. And fetch Widow Miller and the other ranchers. We settle this today." The agreement they drafted reshaped the valley's future. Beef granted water access to smaller ranches in exchange for grazing rights and mutual defense pacts. The railway would still come through, but on terms benefiting the entire community rather than Slate alone. "These terms are generous," Widow Miller observed, studying the document. "Not generous," Beef countered. "Fair, something I should have been all along." Ribeye watched the proceedings with measured interest. When Beef offered him a legitimate partnership, converting his scattered operations into a proper ranch, the old outlaw laughed. "Me, a respectable cattleman? What would people say?" "They'd say times change," Beef replied. "And sometimes men can too." Recovery came slowly. Throughout summer's waning days, Beef regained strength while Angus developed. His voice speaking haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. Clementine divided her time between them, teaching Angus words as she had once taught him harmonica notes, and helping Beef manage ranch business from his sickbed. Ribeye remained nearby, his presence keeping both the law and rival outlaws at bay, while his daughter's name was quietly removed from wanted posters. His men integrated awkwardly with Crimson Ridge hands, teaching each other tricks of their respective trades. By September, when golden light burnished the foothills, Beef could walk short distances with a cane. One evening, he asked Clementine to accompany him to the ridge overlooking the valley. "I've made mistakes," he said, watching the sunset transform. "The landscape. Built walls instead of bridges. Sought power instead of connection." "We all have our regrets," Clementine replied. "What matters is what we build now. I'm trying to build something worth leaving to Angus." Beef turned to face her directly. "Something worth sharing with someone who understands both its cost and its value." The question remained unasked but hung between them, glowing like the horizon. Clementine felt the weight of possibilities, of a future she had never dared imagine. "I've spent my life running," she said softly. "I'm not sure I know how to stay. Perhaps we could learn together." Beef took her hand, his touch tentative, asking rather than demanding. Their courtship unfolded gradually, observed with interest by the entire community. Ribeye made a show of cleaning his guns whenever Beef called on his daughter, but his eyes held reluctant approval. When winter came, bringing heavy snow and long evenings, Beef formally proposed in front of both their unlikely families. Ribai pretended outrage before offering a wedding gift, a deed to land adjoining Crimson Ridge, acquired years ago under an alias. "For my grandnephew," he declared, ruffling Angus's hair, "and whatever troublemakers come after him." The wedding of Ruby Clementine Malone and Bartholomew Beef McGraw took place on the first day of spring. Angus stood as his father's best man, supported by newly designed leg braces crafted by the blacksmith according to Beef's specifications. The boy, who once communicated only through music, now spoke his truth plainly. "We're family now, all of us." At the reception, the newlyweds announced the establishment of the Second Chance Foundation, dedicated to creating opportunities for orphans, reformed outlaws, and anyone seeking redemption. The first beneficiaries would be the children of families displaced by Slate schemes, who would receive education and training at a new school built on Crimson Ridge land. 5 years passed quickly. The railway brought prosperity rather than division, carrying Wyoming beef to eastern markets and bringing settlers who integrated into the growing community. Teenage Angus walked with minimal support across Crimson Ridge's green pastures, where cattle from both Malone and McGraw herds grazed together. On the anniversary of their wedding, Ruby and Beef hosted a celebration that drew people from throughout the territory. As night fell and lanterns illuminated the vast yard, they danced beneath Wyoming stars, while former enemies shared meals around a massive fire pit. Ribai, now a respectable business owner whose steakhouse had become famous throughout the territory, watched his daughter with pride. "Think we'll ever tell him it was all an act?" he asked Beef, nodding toward Angus. "What was?" Beef responded, his arm comfortably around Ruby's waist. "The feud. Sarah and Hannah would have haunted us forever if they knew how stubborn we were." "Some acts become real," Beef said, watching his wife teach a group of children to rope. "And some truths start as fiction." Ruby joined them, her hand finding Beef's with practiced ease. "What secrets are you two sharing now?" "Just wondering what Sarah and Hannah would think of all this," Ribai answered, gesturing to the gathered community. "They know," Ruby said with quiet certainty. "They've always known." As the celebration continued around them, Angus gathered a group of younger children, his harmonica gleaming in the firelight. He played his mother's lullaby, the notes carrying across land that no longer divided but united them all. Beef pulled Ruby closer. "Regrets?" he asked softly. She shook her head, watching as Ribai demonstrated proper knife handling to a group of fascinated boys. "Not one. Not even giving up life on the run. Turns out having somewhere to belong is more exciting than always looking for somewhere to hide." She turned in his arms, her expression serious. "You gave Angus his voice back. You gave me my name back." "Ruby Malone McGraw," he said, tasting the syllables. "It has a certain ring to it, like a dinner bell," she laughed, "calling us all home." Across the yard, Widow Muller raised a toast to the couple, her voice carrying over the celebration. "To second chances," she called, "and to those brave enough to take them." The settlers, cowboys, reformed outlaws and ranchers lifted their glasses toward the unlikely family that had transformed not just a cattle empire, but an entire community. As Angus's harmonica joined with a cowboy's fiddle, the music seemed to embody their shared story, notes that once played alone now creating a harmony greater than its parts. Ruby rested her head against Beef's shoulder, savoring the moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, water rights to negotiate, beef contracts to fulfill, children to raise. But tonight, under stars that had witnessed generations of struggle and reconciliation, they celebrated not just survival, but the rarer achievement of living well. "Some things are worth staying for," she whispered. Beef's answer was to draw her into the dance, their steps sure and steady across ground they now shared. Around them, their pieced-together family continued to grow, proving that even in the harshest landscapes, with enough care and courage, something wonderful could take root and flourish.